So this is an interesting one that we wanted to highlight, and we want to talk about ESG, environmental, social, and governance as a framework. We haven't talked about this on the podcast in a while, is facing backlash along with the concept of B Corps. Full disclosure, Whole Whale is a B Corp. And we want to ask the question if whether eco-certified or transparency certified brands can weather the greenwashing storm. So what is greenwashing? Greenwashing is using labels and other certifications or environmental certifications to kind of levy public reputation without necessarily changing the fundamental damaging processes or product streams that businesses are involved with. So in the high stakes world of environmental and social responsibility, some major financial firms are hitting the brakes on their commitments, actually. So JPMorgan Asset Management and State Street Global Advisors have bowed out from the Climate Action 100, with Blackrock also scaling back, leaving a whopping $14 trillion gap in the initiative's support. George, this is kind of a pivotal moment, I think, for ESG as a concept. We've been critical of ESG, right? ESG indexes on Wall Street include things like big oil companies. And it also represents, I think, a reckoning with the fact that some of those business certifications may not be all they're cut out to be. Again, speaking from Whole Whale, a company I believe in is doing incredible work with regards to appropriate corporate governance and sustainability, but may not necessarily reflect all of those within that process. So, George, in the land of ESG, B Corps, and other business sustainable certifications, where are we now and where are we going to go forwards from here?
Obviously a complicated issue, but watching 14 trillion move away in terms of financial commitments of organizations for ESG is not good. That said, social responsibility and ethical action by companies is by no means like less important to the consumer. If anything, it is more important. And what I think is happening is that we're seeing one, political pressure put on these labels. So all you have to do in that scenario is essentially find the one bad apple, the exception to the rule inside of it. And for B Corps, speaking as a B Corp, there are, thousands of B Corps approved and doing various things in the world. And for instance, in this one case, there is this article out there about one particular, plastic polluter that was certified B Corp, unfortunately. And, that is held up as the example of like, hey, look, they're using the B Corp label to cover the fact that they're literally, polluting local areas. And that was Danon's B Corp certified bottled water brand Aqua is a top plastic polluter in Indonesian rivers, according to an audit done by the Sungai Watch. And unfortunately, that casts a pall across B Corps. And another article by the BBC, and all these articles are just sort of like trickle coming out there. But, I think it is perfectly reasonable and should be expected to scrutinize the people watching the people, the certified bodies. You always have to look at that. But unfortunately, like the complete dismantling, I don't think is a good idea of B Corps. I think I deeply respect the organization. And speaking as somebody who's gone through the recertification process, it was incredibly intense. We've been certified, since 2017, 2018, in that period of time. But for ESG, I think there is a bigger problem because they have essentially become too big an umbrella, too big of a target, and too big of a confusing brand label in the current environment. And there's a quote from I don't want to get this right, Sam Hartzmark of Boston College, and saying basically that the ESG might need a rebrand. The essence of corporate behavior is far from extinct, but potentially, this could trigger a domino effect that could knock over, all of the activities, good and, otherwise, of ESG. So I think for a long time, the segmenting of environmental, social, and governance into separate crediting is probably a smarter idea than trying to do some sort of massive roll up of calculated score that weights diversity against climate. And I don't know if that is it is not the right way to go about it.
Yeah, George, I think that's a great point. And this is something I actually think about quite a lot in research that I do. I'm particularly interested in business and human rights. And businesses do not adhere to a lot of aspects of what we consider human rights. If you look at the supply chains for pretty much any of your clothes, you're going to find some kind of grim stories in there. That being said, there's a role for norm setting, right? So the UN has the guiding principles on business and human rights. It is non-legally binding, but it's a powerful norm setter saying, hey, this is kind of the direction we want to go in, right? And I think that ESG and the idea of B Corps has that potential. It's important to set norms, even if they are faulty. That being said, it's damaging when you have these norms and you have adherence to these norms, purported adherence to these norms, and then outright violations of them. And that undermines the norms, right? So you have companies doing lip service to human rights and sustainability, and they're using the same exploited labor and poor sanitary conditions as everybody else, and that's particularly damaging. So I think we need to thread the line between, yes, you need those norms. Certification can be a way to do that, right? It's often criticized by human rights people of not being enforceable enough, fair trade, all of that stuff. Often criticized, but I think we don't abandon it altogether, right? We still need to strive to set those norms. Something is better than nothing. In the world of human rights and sustainability, something is better than nothing. And I think that is kind of my takeaway from this sort of thing. But of course, we do want to see improvements in how we talk about companies and are more pragmatic about the problems that our global kind of economies have in relation to human rights, sustainability, and transparent business practices.
Yeah, these brands, they trade on trust. Greenwashing is the attack on the trust being used as a safety blanket, as a proxy for doing the actual work. You sort of have this problem of companies, teaching to the test. How do I pass this checklist of 122 items so that we look good, as opposed to just doing good? And to be clear, every nonprofit out there, just because you have a 501c3 doesn't mean you are doing good. That is just a tax classification. The nonprofit sector absolutely has the same types of problems we see with any of these certification bodies. So I think ultimately it is presenting these, targets to attack. One bad apple spoils the bunch, and that is not dissimilar to any, governing body that tries to certify ethical behavior. Although for some reason I don't like ESG and I like B Corps because I'm biased, because I am a B Corp, but I'm realizing that maybe over time these networks just get watered down by the sheer force of bigger being different.
Yeah. Well, George, I think they're a little bit different too. B Corp has an actual certification process, whereas ESG is, you could dump anything in there. Some investors are kind of saying hey, some Blackrock, people are hey, let's lump that in there, So I think they're a little different.
Yeah. And much smaller businesses ultimately in there.
Totally. Yeah. But again, even the fact that we're talking about ESG and there's recognized need for sustainability, human rights, certain level of standards in businesses, is we are much further along than we were 15 years ago in recognizing businesses' accountability. How much has changed on the ground? That's hard to say, but the fact that we're talking about it matters, right? And the people who work at these companies care about those things, even if the companies themselves fall short. So I think it's important.
Yeah, for the nonprofit angle, you're why are nonprofits interested in this? I think, the tri-sector, we work all together. And for nonprofits that are the watchdogs in certain areas, I think that is an avenue of attack, of looking at organizations that are using these umbrellas, these brands, to protect the, frankly, maybe misbehavior of the actual business practice, is a new tactic that I've seen more and more. I see some of that in the news here. You can see that B Corp as that angle for this company out there polluting. You're like, wow, look at this. And it draws a lot more national attention. And so looking at how companies that are misbehaving are misusing these brands is a narrative that I think is a tactic nonprofits that are in the watchdog space can employ.
Absolutely. A key check.